podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to Haway The Podcast. And if you're like me, you can't stop staring at the Premier League at the moment because it does seem like we're at a huge crossroads as a club, not just this season, but in this international break as well, following record-breaking spending during the transfer window, as well as gaining 6 points from a possible 9 to start the Premier League season. So we can think of nobody better to make sense of it all than today's guest, because not only is he a respected author and journalist writing the likes of Inverting the Pyramid, Angels with Dirty Faces and the Barcelona Legacy, but he's also a massive Sunderland fan. And of course, in kind of the respect of the conversation we might have, he wrote Sunderland, a club transformed back in 2007, because today we are very pleased to have Jonathan Wilson with us. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not so bad. I mean, you asked that question to Sunderland fans at the moment, and it's an easy kind of question to answer, isn't it?
I mean, it's been as good a start as we could have hoped for. I mean, yeah, the only reservation, and I hate to come up with reservations straight away, but the fixtures have been kind, and it will get harder. But I think there's pretty good evidence to say, as a newly promoted side, you need 8 points from your first 5 games to have a chance. And yeah, Ipswich last season, their first 2 games were Liverpool and City, yeah, no points, and a little bit of that sort of euphoria of promotion is punctured immediately. The fixture list has been kind to Sunderland, and I think those first 3 games particularly, they'd probably needed minimum 5 points. 6 is obviously better than that. I'm a bit worried about what happened at Burnley, but the Dan Ballard injury, I think the way that Sunderland are set up this season, they're always going to find it slightly harder against teams who don't come at them. I think they're set up to play on the break. So I'm hoping that's what happened at Burnley. But yeah, the next 2 games are big as well. At Palace have a really good side at the minute. I think have started the season well. But from with my Sunderland hat on, hopefully the loss of Eza, the disruption over Gay, if Gay's in a massive sulk and they're really disrupted, maybe we can get something there. And then Villa at home. Villa have started the season dreadfully. And that's actually the first time I'm going to see Sunderland live this season. So hopefully, we can get another win there. And then we're on, 9 or 10 points after 5 games. And we're really not that far away then.
Wow. I mean, you started off with a slightly, neutral comment, and you ended up saying we might be top of the league in 2 games. So we'll get into all of that, because of course we're always grateful that you kind of joined us, but no more so than today, because I imagine you've had a really busy week with the release of a new book, which is called The Power and the Glory and New History of the World Cup. So how's that gone this week?
Yeah, it has been really busy, as you say. So there's so much, so many publicity, interviews, podcasts and things you have to do. You're writing little bits around it. I mean, it's all good. The more of that, the better, obviously, because the more publicity, the more you sell. And that's ultimately the main reason why you're doing a book. I think Sunderland get mentioned. I think the best mention is 1934 World Cup. Spain were probably the team who pushed Italy the hardest. Italy win the 34 World Cup. Spain lose them in the quarterfinal, but they probably are the team that actually test Italy. Spain's warm-up for that tournament, they played 3 games against Sunderland and didn't win a single one. So what I'm saying is, Sunderland probably would have won the World Cup in 1934 if only they'd been allowed to enter.
Wow, we're starting to sound like West Ham fans on this podcast now, aren't we? But and of course, actually, just to plug what we do once a week, we do an On This Week, and we've talked a lot about the '66 World Cup, of course. And I imagine that would have played a part in there in Roker Park, because we did talk about actually kind of how much work went into Roker Park, because if you think, it's amazing when we started talking about it, because we were talking about those games, and it's incredible to think Roker Park was kind of almost 70 years old by the time it hosted the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, the roof on the full end was put in for the World Cup, wasn't it? No, I think did they make it all-seater temporarily? They put in some benches everywhere.
They put wooden benches. They did the main stand. That's when the main stand, kind of the area at the back was all done with the reception and everything. Right.
Yeah, so my dad was at all 4 games there. So he was at that quarter-final, Soviet Union v Hungary, which if you think about, So when I found out he'd been there, and sort of, God, you had Lev Yashin in goal for the Soviets, you had Florian Albert up front for Hungary. Genuinely world great players. What do you remember about the game? The ball burst. So he was an accountant, and it's just so typical. The one thing that he remembers is, better enter that in the material loss column. Order a new ball for next week. But he had very little memory apart from that. But I mean, to see Lev Yashin live, annoyingly, the famous photo of Yashin from that World Cup is of Goodison Park. It looks a little bit like the main stand because you can see the Archibald Leach lattice work, but it is from Goodison in the semi. But I've talked to a handful of the Soviet team who played. They stayed at student accommodation from Poly.
Oh, right.
But they were all sort of, we loved Sunderland. It was great. It was like, had a really nice time. They talked about how welcomed they had been. They didn't sort of know what reception they get. Obviously, middle of a Cold War. But I think it was genuine. I think they were sort of very specific memories. They weren't sort of just giving a generic, oh yes, it was nice. It was. I think there genuinely was a sort of affection for the place there.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned memories because the last ever game at Roker Park, my one memory is Bobby Saxton getting frustrated with losing football, so he booted a few into the crowd, and literally that's my only memory against Liverpool. So that's about it. But just obviously that book is kind of all about the brilliant stuff about the history of the World Cup. But just a quick one about international football, because of course we're in an international break. And I genuinely sit in front of you, talking to you, I genuinely don't know who England are playing and when they're playing. And I mean, it might be my age, because when I was young, I was all like checking who we were playing and when, and the characters of it in England had this aura about, with the players we had and maybe the manager. And again, it might be age that comes into that. But I just, sometimes when the international break comes around, it's almost like you slump. Well, I do personally, and I know a lot of people. We talk about, in the club, in the chat for Rook Report, in the podcast, and it's almost this. Oh, here we go. We've got an international break coming. I mean, do you feel international football's lost something?
I think definitely at this stage. I think the major tournaments are still great, and in some ways, the most fun the football is that the club football is so determined by the finances that. International football, it's obviously the level is nowhere near as high as the best club football, but it does still have this sort of purity. It does have this emotion about it. I think one of the things that's great about it is that you have to create a plan to fit the players rather than buying the players to fit the plan. So, which is how football was until maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Even for top teams, that they might know that they didn't have a particularly good left back, say, but finding the right left back, you didn't necessarily have the money to do it. You didn't have a scouting network to do it. You couldn't sort of enter the attributes and characteristics you wanted into some algorithm and, here's a lad playing in the Chilean third division. He'll do a great job for you. So it's as I say, I think it's a lesser form of the game if what you're looking at is how good is the technical quality. But in some ways, it's a greater form of the game because it's more human and it's more flawed. And the way football keeps on chucking up quirks like, Scotland's best two players both being left backs, Cameroon's best two players both being goalkeepers, England having a real problem on the left side, basically since I was born. And I do quite like that, but I know exactly what you mean. I'll be honest with you, I looked up yesterday whether England were playing today or Sunday and what time it was. I knew they were playing Andorra, and I know they've got Serbia on Tuesday, which, that will be a difficult game. But I think one of the issues for nations of England's stature is to qualify. Of course, we'll qualify. It doesn't matter. And actually, they might be in a bit of bother if they lose in Serbia, which, given recent performances, are entirely capable of doing in Serbia, are quite good. They will be under a bit of pressure. But it's not like the 70s and 80s when qualification, even the 90s, when qualification was really tough. You look at that, all this, the disgrace of English football in the 70s when they couldn't qualify for 2 World Cups in a row. Like, basically, they drew a game where they absolutely battered Poland, who went on to finish third in the World Cup. And that cost them a place at the World Cup. And then in 78, they finished level on points with Italy. Italy qualify, England don't. Basically because they haven't scored enough goals against Luxembourg. So the margins were so fine then. The qualifiers were really important. Now, I think with the expanded tournament, with the way that Western Europe seems to have industrialised youth development. So, I mean, Italy are a notable exception. And at half-time last night when they were drawn 0-0 against Estonia, I was thinking, are they even not going to make the playoffs here? Fair enough, finishing behind Norway, because that's a bit of a quirk that Norway, this Norway generation is better than what's gone before, and so they're undervalued by the coefficient. So if you get in a group with Norway, you've been a bit unlucky. But they're in danger of finishing behind Israel, Italy, and especially if they couldn't have beaten Estonia, as it turned out they scored 5 in the second half. but fundamentally, the Western European side should just be out the World Cup. And so I think these games feel a bit pointless. But if you talk to, I don't know, a fan from Slovakia who are going great in qualifying and might qualify for a World Cup, which they clearly don't take for granted, or African qualifying is reaching a really interesting pitch. Nigeria in real danger of not qualifying, which given there'll be 8 African sides, would be a huge embarrassment for them. DR Congo should qualify first time. Rwanda are going great. So for those countries, this is brilliant. And football is about them as well as about us. So we have to accept it. Whether having this, I think this break particularly feels weird that with 3 games into the season, it's sort of, we just got started. I finished. And I think that's particularly frustrating from a fan point of view. What I would say from a very selfish journalist point of view is coming a week after the transfer window closed, thank God I don't have to go to a game this weekend and I can relax a bit.
Yeah, that's true. And I think at the beginning of all that, you mentioned the initial algorithm that found Milton Nunes, I think, when you were going through that. But yeah, just in terms of you keeping busy, I also noticed that you're doing It Was What It Was podcast, which is part of the Overlap group, which is a podcast purely devoted to the history of football, which if anyone who's listened to our on this week will know that without we love on Haway The Podcast. That's been going for about a year. And you also do Libero, which again is just keeping you busy. So you've got all these things going, but they're very different podcasts, aren't they?
Yeah, so Libero, it's me and 6 other journalists. And basically we realised that there's, the football podcast space is incredibly crowded. And there's loads of really good stuff out there, from club podcasts to things like Football Weekly or the Football Ramble that sort of round up what's going on. But we sort of thought there's actually nothing that goes a little bit deeper. There's what Libero does. Libero comes out twice a week. Comes out Tuesday and Friday, and sometimes Wednesday and Friday, just depending on how fixtures and events fall. And it obviously reacts to an extent to what's going on, but it's not going to be. And what do you make of Bournemouth v Wolves at the weekend? That's not what we're about. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with doing that, but that's not us. We take a theme and we go into it in more detail. And so some of those themes would be, PSR, is it a good thing? Or most recent episode, we looked at Arsene Wenger, his legacy, and how he sort of slightly sullied it by his behaviour with FIFA recently. And the great thing is, because the 7 of us, because we often end up at different games, we're going around the world all the time. We've got James Horncastle there, who has a very European perspective. Tarek Panji, who's very good on the business side, is often in the US. Hopefully we've got a diversity of opinion and we can really sort of thrash through big topics. And the last sort of 6 weeks or so, we've seen real growth. It's only been going 6 months. So that's sort of, from a business point of view, it's looking quite promising at the minute, but it's sort of fun to do. It was what it was, a history podcast, huge amounts of fun to do. And that is just, we pick a topic, and sometimes it'll be related to an anniversary, or, when Mohamed Salah won Player of the Year, we looked at what's his backstory, and we go right back to the 19th century and all the way through. So that's very much football history, Libero, the politics of business, the culture, the wider themes of football.
Yeah, sounds brilliant. So everyone check those out. And you said you pick themes on that podcast. Now, because I've got the author of Inventing the Pyramid with us, I can't help but kind of quiz you on some of this stuff that's going on at the minute, because we've had a conversation in the past. I remember you talking about that. You tried to draw on paper all the football connections. Like there used to be a comedy connections program on BBC, and you tried to do a similar thing in terms of football tactics. And you tried to do it on paper, and you said it kept getting huge with all the branches that were coming off. But I mean,
but I have done it, and it is available as a poster. If you go to the Blizzard website, you can buy it there. Yeah, it looks really nice actually. The designer's done a great job from my chaotic scribbling. So yeah, I did actually get that finished.
Yeah, and just on the Blizzard, by the way, I do annoy my other half because I've got quite a few shelves devoted to episode, and it gets bigger, unfortunately, and I need more shelves. But yeah, check out the Blizzard as well because it's got some fantastic merchandise on there. But yeah, just going back to kind of that football tactics discussion, because do you think almost football's at a bit of a crossroads with tactics and styles? Because at the minute, you look over the last 12 months, and okay, results are bound to have an impact on that. But there seems to be within the punditry in football and within the media, there's a bit of a backlash against Pep Guardiola and what he brought in and what he brought into football. And people held up that as a pinnacle for a few years. But do you think now people are going, actually, you're almost allowed to do something different? And do you feel that backlash?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Guardiola is part of that, to be honest. I think one of the things you have to accept with Guardiola is that he has his core principles, which obviously are drawn from total football and having worked under Johan Cruyff and Louis van Gaal, who he says was actually a bigger influence tactically on him than Cruyff. Okay. You really see that with his early Barcelona teams. Yeah, the 4-3-3. Okay, you got Messi being very sort of free within that, and the obsession with possession, dominating games by holding the ball. But Guardiola's always evolved. He's had that spell when he was playing with the four centre backs. He had that spell when Haaland first arrived where I need to get an extra body in midfield. How am I going to do that? And he had John Stones stepping forward. So he's constantly evolving. I think one of the fascinations, and maybe this is slightly oversimplifying, but you see people who've worked with him who leave to become managers in their own right. And it feels like, this might be Rory Smith's idea, to be fair, and we talked about this at length on Libero, that people like Enzo Maresca and Mikel Arteta, they've taken where the Guardiola philosophy was at the point they left, and they're enacting that, and they don't have the breadth of vision and the flexibility and that willingness constantly to evolve of Guardiola. So I think you look at Arteta, and his back four is very solid, and he almost doesn't quite trust Miles Lewis-Skelly because he likes to push forward. And Arteta loves Jurrien Timber because Timber is so tactically intelligent and so good at filling space. And so, yeah, you almost see different eras of Pepism manifesting under other coaches in the Premier League, which I think is fascinating. But I get the impression that what's happened in the last sort of year or two, and Guardiola himself talked about this last season, is that his juego de posición, his positional game, it can become slightly predictable. When it's going wrong, it becomes predictable. Whereas something like Antonio Raiola at Bournemouth, to an extent, Slot at Liverpool, maybe even Eddie Howe at Newcastle, the fact that they encourage their forward players to run with the ball more and to take a few more risks, that adds this extra dimension. It adds an improvisational dimension. It makes them less predictable. And I think that's one of the reasons for Bournemouth's success, and success comparative to wage bill, is that they do have a greater freedom. And of course, there is a risk to that. There is a downside to that you might you lose the ball more often. That means you might be counted against. And what I think is fascinating looking at City now is seeing Guardiola trying to build a new team, almost starting from scratch. I mean, they brought in 10 players, I think, this year. 4 in January, 6 in the summer, depending exactly who you count as a senior player and whatever. And it's not entirely clear to me what the plan is, what the system he wants to play is. Because some of those players seem quite free, people like Doku and Oscar Bob, Cherki, even Marmouche. They're people who like to run with the ball. They wouldn't necessarily seem to fit in the old Guardiola system. But he's not doing to them what he did to Jack Grealish and saying, stop dribbling, get the ball, turn inside, give a pass. Yeah. Which, I mean, you see Grealish's dribbles per game drops by 40% between Villa and City. But I also think he doesn't quite know what he's doing with his back four. That Ayat Nouri seems a very odd player, very good attacking player, but quite wild as a fullback. And that doesn't seem at the minute quite to be working. So and Donnarumma does not feel like a Guardiola goalkeeper. A great goalkeeper, obviously, but how good is he with the ball at his feet? I'm not convinced by that. I think with James Trafford, we saw one of the issues that Guardiola sides often have when things are going wrong is you play balls in behind the back four and there's loads of space there. And that can be to do with the pressing not quite being right, that you're giving opponents time to measure that kind of pass. But also, I was at the Brighton game, and it was apparent to me that last half hour when Brighton suddenly they made the 4 subs, they clicked up a level. City were wobbling all over the place, the sort of collapse you don't normally see from a Guardiola side. And it occurred to me one of the problems was that James Trafford's starting position was maybe 5 yards too deep. And so that space where Ederson would have been able to sweep up was that little bit bigger. And that meant that Brighton could get runners into that area. So I think City are going through this really difficult sort of tactical rebirth. It's fascinating as an outsider to watch.
Yeah. And I mean, do you think that's a reflection in football that everyone's at the moment looking for that next thing? Because it seemed, just like fashion almost, things seem to come round in a full circle. And I find it amazing people's reaction now when a second strike is put on. It's almost these gasps of shock that a second strike has been put on when I grew up with all of the strike partnerships that I grew up with in the 90s. And now it's like shock when there's a second strike on the pitch. But do you think everyone's looking for that? Because I think we've come out of that Pep and I suppose the Spain, and we're kind of coming out of that era. But I'm not sure we've quite found the next one yet.
Yeah, I think that is true. And I think we've actually been through quite an unusual period where one manager's ideas have dominated so much. I think that's pretty unusual in football, that somebody can dominate for, what we're talking, 15, 16 years. But yeah, I think you're right, that people have begun to question that. Football evolves all the time, and that's one of the beauties of it as a sport, that you can't stand still. And I think one of the things you see in the Premier League, and I always worry when I say things like this that I sound like one of these Premier League tub thumpers. But the Premier League, because of the money in it, is an incredibly high level. It's incredibly challenging. It's challenging for players, but it's also challenging for managers. So I think Ange Postecoglou is a great example of this. He turns up at Tottenham. I've got my way of playing. It's just the way we always play. And the 10 games, it works, because people are like, hang on, what? This is nuts. He's attacking way too much. We don't know how to deal with this. and it was something almost freakish about it, and people couldn't deal with that. But you've got 19 of the best people in the world at their job looking at him, going, right, how do we deal with this? What do we do? Backed up by data analysts, coaches, extraordinary resources. And after 10 games, okay, this is what we do. It's fine. So you as a manager have to be constantly evolving. And you see some managers just wilt under that pressure. And some are able to keep going for a year, some for 2 years, some for 5 years. I think, look at what happened with Gary O'Neill. Did great at Bournemouth, moves to Wolves. First year there, really, really good. And then suddenly, bang, it's gone. And that's, maybe that's what's happening with Wolves at the minute as well, that people have worked out Peter Pereira. And then the manager, they get under pressure, they start to second guess themselves, they lose faith in their processes. Maybe their processes are not worthy of faith. Maybe they have become too obvious to opponents. But that is one of the reasons why so many managers are burned by the Premier League. It's really, really, really tough with the scrutiny of the entire world on you all the time. So, and your question is it cyclical? It sort of is, but the problem with saying it's cyclical is that implies we get back to where we were 10 years, 20 years before. I think it's more that a way of playing will grow up. People will work out a counter to that, and then people work out a counter to that, and a counter to that. So I think rather than cyclical, it's more like a helix. It's moving forward. And yeah, it is. There is to an extent, because a lot of football is in either end of two poles. So you play possession football or you play direct football. And how do you deal with possession football? Maybe you go a bit more direct. You say, we don't need the ball. You have 70% of the ball, we'll have 30%, but our use of it will be more dangerous. And then maybe the direct football takes over. Well, how do you counter that? Well, if we hold the ball a bit longer, if we're a bit more patient, if we make better use of the ball, if we make sure that when we have the ball before we launch an attack, we get our defence set so we can deal with them breaking quickly at us or playing directly at us, which is really what Guardiola football is, then yeah, it looks like a circle, but that circle is always moving forward. Because when you get back round, you're doing it with the knowledge of what's gone before as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just chuckling when you mentioned Postecoglou because at Spurs, because bizarrely, it reminded me of when our dealers went in at Spurs and had that front five of, what was it, Dumachescu, Anderton, Klinsmann, Sheringham, Barmby, and he almost had that front five. And last season, I was saying, because I've got Spurs fans who I'm friends with, and I kept telling them that they wouldn't have it. But I was kind of saying he was almost, at times it looked like he was trying to recreate that. But you're right, I remember that game against Chelsea. That just blew people's minds that he almost just went for it.
Well, that game against Chelsea, you mean the 4-1 game where they had 2 men sent off?
Yeah.
Which I think that was the 11th game, wasn't it? I think they won 8 and drew 2 of the first 10 league games. That was the 11th game. The thing with that game, and this is where I suddenly went from being, Postecoglou's quite good, to, hang on, this is what he's not what I thought he was. I thought playing that ludicrously high line in the second half, I thought I was really clever because he knew it would take Chelsea time to work out what to do against it. You never come against a team who literally defends on the halfway line. And in retrospect, it's quite obvious that, okay, you as a centre forward or you as the winger, you drop off 10 yards, they're not going to follow you that far, and then you turn and you run, and they can ping the ball, and you've got to run on them, you're going to get to it. And it took them 25 minutes to work that out.
Yeah.
And as soon as that, there was a chance that, I think it was Nicholas Jackson had it, and of course it was Nicholas Jackson, so he missed the chance. And as soon as that had happened, and this is 25 minutes, the second half or so, I thought Postecoglou should have clicked his fingers, everybody drop it deep, defend on the edge of the box, waste time. And I think they might have got away with that. But he kept playing that high line. It's like, well, hang on. If you're watching, if I can see it from home, you on the bench as an expert must be able to see this has been worked out. And 20 minutes of a team just popping balls in behind you and having worked out how to deal with the offside trap, you're going to get murdered here, as did happen. Just play traditionally in that last 20 minutes. But what you have done is you've taken 25 minutes out of the game by doing something unusual that they couldn't work out. So, I felt what you saw there was his lack of capacity to think on his feet. And then, of course, the huge irony is the second half of last season, they weren't playing Ange ball at all. They were playing very kind of, almost Mourinho football, sitting deep, risk-averse in Europe. The game away against Bodo Glimt, it was just sort of like, well, if we keep playing our greater physicality, we will get chances, which is what happened. And you sort of think, well, maybe you could have done that a bit earlier and it would have been all right. So Postecoglou trying to pretend that there was this weird thing that the Europa League success, which was held up as being vindication of Postecoglou, actually was proof that his methods were wrong. Because as soon as he abandoned them, he won something. So weirdly, by winning it undermined his entire point.
Yeah. And if there was ever an advert for working out a team's football and intelligence, it was Chelsea in that game. But anyway, moving on to Sunderland, let's get on to the lads, because let's start with last season's promotion, because it really was an odd one. I mean, I've seen quite a few promotions over the years. You might have seen one or two more that, we had that time to wait for the playoffs and prepare. And then, in the end, we had those kind of nail-biting games against Coventry and Sheffield United that took 2 last-minute goals, which will no doubt never be forgotten. But what did you make of the way we got promoted in terms of, if you think about it, coming back from 16th the year before and finishing 4th with not far off the same squad of players?
Yeah, I mean, I think 16th was that was a slightly false position. They shouldn't have been 16th. They were a better squad than that. They just played abysmally in the last 3 months of the season. Everything fell apart. So I sort of expected Sunderland to be challenging for the playoffs, top 8, top 10. And then they had the great start. I think that was never going to be sustainable. I think it was pretty obvious to everybody that Sunderland ended up by miles in both directions the 4th best team in the league. Mm-hmm. They were miles behind the top 3, miles ahead of the rest. And that actually ended up being quite a sort of comfortable position that, I don't know if it's actually true, but it feels like the last 3 months of the season, there was no team within 10 points either way of Sunderland. Maybe teams closer within 6 or something at various points, but there was never a danger of Sunderland finishing the 5th, never a danger of them finishing 3rd. Those last, was it 7 games they went without a win at the end of the regular season? And I was sort of thinking, what's he doing here? Momentum's everything in the playoffs. But actually, he was right, wasn't he? I mean, you can't deny it. Sunderland have scored injury time goals in 5 of the last 6 games now. which is something we probably haven't done since the Roy Keane era.
Roy Keane, yeah.
And so, I mean, that, whether maybe it's a freak, maybe it's fitness, maybe it's mental strength, but you can't say anything other than Nabri's got that absolutely right of giving players a break. The last couple of games of the season, playing something a bit closer to the first team, getting them back in rhythm. And then actually the Coventry game, I felt both games. Well, I felt the game down there, which I watched in the Blue Bell in Fulham, which is the first game I've watched in a pub in Sunderland for 20 odd years. I've forgotten how much fun it could be. And I actually felt Sunderland were pretty comfortable in that game. The first 20 minutes, but once they'd seen off that storm, it was just crosses in the box and Sunderland had them clear. And then it was, can they get a goal? Obviously lost a bit of concentration after getting the first goal. But I thought they played that really well as an away leg. And then even the home game, I actually thought, okay, they probably lost a bit of control, maybe 10, 15 minutes before half-time, maybe 25 minutes of the second half. Once Romain Mundle had come on, which was 80-odd minutes, I thought, there's only one winner here. It might go to penalties, but... So I was slightly baffled. And I say this as somebody who tends to be more critical of Sunderland than other teams, which I think we all are, aren't we? We sort of... what they're meant to be doing, and you get very frustrated when they're not doing it. But actually, those two games, I thought I was baffled by the sort of general reaction of, oh, yeah, Coventry on top here. Well, I mean, they had 5 shots on target over 210 minutes. Yes, Sunderland played without the ball, but they played without the ball very intelligently. And we'd seen them do that the away game at Burnley, the second half of the home games in Sheffield United and Middlesbrough. They're good at that. And I think this season that's not the worst model to have. So, they were the 4th best team. Does that mean they didn't deserve to go up? Well, that's not what the rules are. And the playoff final was brilliant. It was. I don't know. Am I overstating this? But is a single afternoon maybe the best afternoon we've had since '73?
Yeah, I wouldn't argue against that. And you talked about debating the rules. You're going back to 1990 when Newcastle were complaining about the playoffs back then. But yeah, I mean, coming back to the summer, straight after, almost within the next few weeks. I mean, let's say 2 weeks after that Wembley, that day at Wembley, you had Joe Bellingham moving off to Dortmund. Enzo Lefebvre obviously confirmed as soon as our final whistle went, but the other one was Florent Gazolfi. I mean, do you think straight away that the club, almost as soon as our final whistle went, almost realised, right, we're behind and we're not only chasing the Premier League, we need to get as good as the 3 above us first and then look at the Premier League above them. So with those 3 moves, do you think that kind of kick-started the summer?
Oh, definitely. And I think that started way, way, way before the playoff final. The thing that I was really encouraged by that first sort of week, 10 days of July, was how many deals Sunderland did. How many deals for good players as well. And a real sense of, okay, they've thought this through. They're not scrabbling around. This isn't, signing John Stead because, we need a forward. He's a forward. We'll get him. Or signing Torre-Andre Flo, felt like a bit of a panic move near the end. This was carefully mapped out, carefully planned. I think by and large, Spickman's done a pretty good job. I think his recruitment or his identification of young talent has been very, very good. I know, and I would share it, the frustration not bringing in a centre forward. But at the same time, if the right centre forward's not there, it's probably best not to waste the money on it.
Yep.
And only they know, what they've identified, what they're looking for, who's available, what deals they're doing, what things they got in the pipeline. I think they've done enough to sort of deserve a degree of trust at the moment. So that first week, 10 days, I'd gone from leaving Wembley thinking, it doesn't matter next season, celebrate this, and let's have a great couple of days, and we'll worry about that next season, and at least we're going to get loads of money, and there's nothing wrong with the Championship. I don't mind being back there, just sort of try and forget our games next season. To by sort of mid-July thinking, there's a chance. It's going to be hard, but there is now a chance. And I think as the window went on, the signings of, talking to people in football, talking to people who scout players, who deal with recruitment, the general perception in football is Sunderland have had an excellent window. And I think You can see the plan with the signings. I think the fact that they have put more experience in was very necessary. I think that was, again, something you could criticise Spakeman for, that it was a bit, it's brilliant having kids. They've got energy. They've got this sort of verve, but occasionally they need an older head. Well, Granit Xhaka gives you that straight away. Reinildo gives you that. So that was I think a very positive thing. It wasn't just sort of, we're going to keep signing kids. It was, we'll sign kids. We'll also sign people a bit more battle hardened. I think also the physicality of the players they've brought in. I think I was really struck last season. It was I can't remember if it was the game where they lost to Tottenham, but did a Southampton game, and Ivan Juric, who I think will go down statistically as one of the worst ever Premier League managers. I have to say, I always found him very engaging and felt a bit sorry for him, but he was very honest, and he said, the thing that I didn't expect when I came to this job is I thought we technically wouldn't be as good as our opponents. I thought tactically we might not be as good as our opponents. But I didn't realise physically we were going to get bullied as well. And he said, when you don't have any of those three, there's nothing you can do. And so I think there is a danger that teams going up underestimate the physicality of the Premier League. And I think you look at the signings that Sunderland and Leeds have made, they've really gone for physical, tough, quick players. And I'd say the players that Sunderland have bought have clearly been brought to a plan of, the majority of games, we will not have 50% of the ball. We'll have 40%, 35% of the ball. We'll get quick players who can play on the break. We'll get players who are good in the air, so that set plays we cause a threat. And, touch wood so far, signs are pretty promising.
Yeah, I've got two mates who are season ticket holders at Ipswich, and they kept telling me during the summer they couldn't believe when the likes of the Palaces and the Bournemouths and the Brentfords went to Portman Road. When they were watching them, they thought, God, it's like men against boys when they saw, and they couldn't get over that. But just talking about, it's been a strange window, I think, in total. I think it's been kind of more eventful, if you like, than the last few windows. But do you think Sunderland were really clever? Because I think we surprised a lot. I think we surprised the whole Premier League, where I think a lot of clubs in the Premier League were waiting for that first domino to fall, or they were seemed to be waiting for something, or to make sure of things. And we went out and just said, no, Diarra's our man, Sadiqi's our man. And while other clubs are seemingly waiting, we got those early deals done.
I think Diarra and Sadiqi are both like really promising, really good talent. I think that raised eyebrows as well. I think to an extent, the recruitment is a little bit, there's an element of momentum to it, that other players of a similar stature to Sadiqi and Diarra would look at that and think, actually, I wouldn't mind playing in a side with them. That looks like they must know something. They must know there's a team that's on the rise. Maybe this is a good opportunity for me to get my foothold in English football, and probably going to Sunderland, I'll get a game. Whereas if I went to, a team that's expecting to be challenging for Europe, maybe I end up on the bench playing half a dozen games. But that looks like a side where I could slot in. It wouldn't be even if it is a relegation campaign, it doesn't look like it's going to be a 15-point, 20-point campaign. It's going to be a 30-point campaign. And I could see myself doing quite well there. So I think that's one of the, but it makes sense, doesn't it? We've seen this so often that you saw it with Manchester United in the late 40s and 50s. They got a reputation for signing good young players and giving them a chance. So good young players go there because they know they're going to get good education and get a chance. And hopefully Sunderland become I'm not suggesting Sunderland are about to win the league 5 times under Lebris and win the European Cup. But hopefully this is the sign of a team that can at least establish itself, as Brighton and Brentford and Bournemouth have, as a mid-table Premier League club that has aspirations to maybe do slightly better and get into Europe every once in a while.
Well, you've just mentioned those clubs, Brighton, Brentford, Bournemouth. They seem to be the kind of blueprint. Do you think now people are looking at Sunderland like that?
I hope so. I mean, the fear obviously is that the last 6 teams to get promoted came straight down without putting up much of a fight. I mean, averaging under a fraction over 20 points a game between them, a season between them. So it's one of the downsides of success of the Brightons, the Brentfords, the Bournemouths is that it's not that you have sort of 12 Premier League teams who are guaranteed to be there and then a relegation battle between 8. It's like there's 15 who are guaranteed to be there. And so one of the things I was spending the summer doing was thinking, well, look, we're going to have to probably finish above Leeds and Burnley if we're going to stay up. But which other team can we drag down? West Ham, maybe. Although after their last results, who knows what's going on there, and who knows what's going on at Forest even.
Yeah.
I looked at Brentford, given all the changes there, and thought that might go wrong for them. And I'm looking at the rest thinking, well, I'm not sure there's anybody. And you think, okay, Forest is such a volatile club, maybe with the pressure of European football, maybe Marinakis, somehow sort of blows up the whole thing. It's not likely, but maybe it's a possibility. But there's not really many, there's not many stragglers you think, oh, we can pick them off. So that's the negative of it. But equally, if you can replicate even Bournemouth, I sort of thought, well, they've lost their keeper, 3 of their back 4. Maybe they look great. They're going to be fine. But yeah, they are an example of what you can do. And if you're Sunderland, I guess you look at that and say, all right, Bournemouth average gate, the stadium's 10,500 capacity.
Yeah, ridiculous.
So there's got to be more. I mean, I know it's a much wealthier area than Sunderland, but there's got to be more money in Sunderland, surely long term. Brighton, I don't know what capacity the Amex is, high 20s, maybe, is it 30 even? I don't know, but it's a lot smaller than the Stadium of Light. And again, it's a much more affluent area, so maybe there is more money floating around. Its proximity to London means it's going to get sponsorship, commercial opportunities that are not available to Sunderland. Maybe it's even more attractive to foreign players coming in, all of whom seem obsessed by proximity to an airport, and Gatwick clearly is very close to Brighton. No, this is true, and it's something and I know we don't want to hear it, but it is something that kind of you have to take into account. So I spoke to Ulla Toivonen a couple of years ago, and sort of did the interview. He's now sporting director of Malmö, or he got some role at Malmö. I can't remember exactly what it is. And I went to Sweden to see him. We were doing a piece on the Swedish league, and he was lovely, really nice. We were just having a chat afterwards, and I sort of said, "Yeah, what do you remember of your time at Sunderland?" And he was, "Oh, I had a great time. To be honest, spent all the time I had this lovely house in Ponteland, and it was him, Seb Larson, a couple of others. We spent all our time together, and it's right next to the airport. It's great, really convenient." Okay, so like you didn't see the sort of beauties of the Weir Valley. You weren't sort of walking along the cliffs at Whitburn and thinking, "God, this is nice." You were just sort of thinking, "God, I'm really close to the airport and get out of here as quick as I can." But I think that is what is particularly foreign players. I think that is something that really matters to them, and it's an advantage Brighton have. They've leveraged proximity to Gatwick. Brentford as well. It's the GTEC's a great stadium. They've done everything at that club incredibly well, and it is in London, which obviously has the money, and it has the fact that it is London's, and people want to live in London. But its stadium's half the size of a Stadium of Light, so hopefully that can weigh in Sunderland's favour.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned kind of long term, and you've already mentioned Granit Xhaka, who was the huge statement signing that we made during the summer. But there was this talk of it was almost hints of it, this kind of 10-year plan, and almost that, would he kind of move into coaching, and do you think there was likely an element of that to get him to come to Sunderland, that saying, it's not just playing the Premier League for a year or two, and we'll stick some legs around you, but you can move on and move up with the club as well.
Yeah, possibly. If that's what he wants to do, why not give him a chance? If you've played in the Premier League in midfield, the vast majority of players who've done that will be tactically very bright. I think there's one or two very obvious exceptions, Declan Rice, but maybe even Steven Gerrard. But fundamentally, why would he not be good at that job? The fact he's played, in Germany, he's played in Switzerland, he's played in England, he's seen a lot of different football. There's every reason to think he might be quite a good coach. If he can do that at your club, if that's one of the things that you say, right, come in, play for 2 or 3 seasons, maybe start to do his badges, I don't know, but get your badges, get a bit of experience. We'll let you look after the youth team for a couple of sessions a week, and then if that goes well, you can step up a bit, and then, who knows, in 5-8 years, you could be assistant manager, or you could be first team coach. I don't have a problem with that at all. I presume there's been no guarantees. But look, here is a pathway if you want it. I think is a very sensible way of attracting experienced older players.
Yeah. Continuity is a bit of a buzzword, I suppose, at clubs at the minute. And but yeah, just going back to Sunderland's window in general, over the last week, a couple of times I've described it as historic, and obviously it is because we broke all sorts of records, so they're going to be in the record books for a while. You wrote the book Sunderland, A Club Transformed, and we've I suppose said it before about false dawns and all of that, but this seems like one of those crossroads crossroads even, where even in years to come, 20 years down the line, that I think we're going to be talking about it either way. So even if it doesn't go right or it does go right, this has been one of the most historic summers in Sunderland's history.
Oh, yeah. And they've given it a crack. They haven't done what Luton did. And I think one of the things that was really impressive last season is I think they had the 14th highest wage bill in the Championship. So Sunderland didn't buy their way out of the Championship. Whereas I think under Roy Keane, they did sign a lot of players that summer, which then caused problems down the line that they basically spent the next 10 years trying to cut the wage bill. Every summer they cut the wage bill. Every January they built the wage bill up again because they started the season terribly. And they circled near and near the plug hole until David Moyes turned up to push them down it. But there's no suggestion of that this summer. The wealth of the owners is obviously very different. Hopefully we're not moving into a financial crash, which obviously hammered the Irish investment in 2008 and leads ultimately to Ellis Short. So I think we shouldn't underestimate spending 10 seasons in the Premier League in a row is not, it's obviously Sunderland's history. That was what we did. But since 1958, that has not been what we've done. So that was a period, it didn't really feel like it, but it was a period of unusual success. And you're right, this is a pivotal moment that if Sunderland can finish, even if they finish 17th, if they then spend another 60, 70, 80 million next summer, I don't quite know how that would work with PSR, but I think Sunderland have to accept, and I think this is something Newcastle got badly wrong this summer, there is a food chain, and the clubs who perform best are the ones who understand their position in that. Mm. And, Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford, the three Bs who should be our sort of model, they've been very good at that. They accept that you have to sell. And I don't want to turn this into sort of accountancy live, but if in Newcastle's arguments about PSR's crushing us, they signed Alexander Isak for £60 million on a 6-year contract. In those days, you could amortise contracts over their entire length. Now you're limited to maximum of 5 years. 6-year contract. It's 10 million a year. So after 3 years, they spent 30 million on him. So his book value is 30 million. They sell him for 130 million, which arrives bang immediately at £100 million book profit. So what they can then do is, because they can amortise contracts up to 5 years, that effectively frees up £500 million. Now, obviously, there's other fees as wages taken into account. So this is massively oversimplified. 500 million quid is a huge amount of money. And obviously, you have to be slightly conscious of the fact that you're pushing this down the road. But as Chelsea have proved, you can keep doing this. And as long as you're selling at a constant profit, but your PSR headroom is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that's why I think one of the things Everton have got badly wrong for years is they keep signing 28, 29-year-olds who failed somewhere else. They think, we can resurrect them. And look, there will be cases where that works. And I really hope, because I love watching them play, Jack Grealish is one of those. And it started very well for him. And I'm not saying you absolutely should not do that. I think Fulham have been quite good at that. So they saw something in Alex Iwobi where they hadn't quite worked at Arsenal or Everton. And Iwobi's been brilliant for them for a year and a bit. So it can work. But if your entire strategy is signing players who have passed their peak or who there's huge question marks over, they have no resale value, and you end up just racking up debts and people on big wages who aren't playing good football for you. So if you're below the top 5, 6 in the Premier League, you have to sign young and then think, right, they get to 24, 25, 26, we'll sell them. That generates revenue. It gives you PSR headroom, and you go out and do it again. And one of the great things I think Sunderland have done, and Bellingham is an example of this, they've identified talent young, and they're selling at a healthy profit, which then increases the amount of PSR headroom you have. So, as long as Sunderland don't get into the mindset of, we've got 4 or 5 great players, we've got to keep them. You've got 4 or 5 great players, maybe you have to sell 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah. And talking about our place in the food chain, I worked out a few years ago, I did the average, and I think since our first relegation, our average league position was 8th in the second tier. I did this a few years ago. I don't think it'll be too different at the minute, but it was 8th, which just shows, that's been our place since the since the 50s. So, you have to sometimes remember where you, and when you do 10 years in the top flight, that's an achievement compared to where you've been before. But yeah, just in terms of the Premier League and the last couple of years, which we've touched on, how important is it for the Premier League not only to have a little bit of drama, but that one of the promoted sides stay up? Because a lot of people now are talking about a closed shop, and the debate is whether it's been an anomaly for a couple of years or whether this is turning into that closed shop that people are talking about the European Super League would be. So how important is it that one of the promoted sides stay up?
Oh, I think it's massively important, because otherwise, what have you got? You got basically a 17 top division. You have 3 guests come in every year and get smashed around. And then what does that do? Just because the parachute payments, it just unbalances the championship. So I think it's hugely important. I mean, as a neutral, I really hope at least 2 of the 3 stay up. And so I find myself sort of in this slightly odd position of watching Leeds thinking, with my Sunderland hat on, please lose so they finish below us. with my sort of for the good of football hat on, thinking, please win so that 2 of the promoted teams can stay up. And if Burnley stay up as well, we're great. But I'd be surprised if all 3 did. Although it did happen 3 seasons ago. So, yeah, I think it is massively important. But I think that gulf between Premier League and Championship is a big problem for football that it's not answering. And one of the problems football has on a sort of broad governance level, I think, is that everybody looks at their own sector, everybody looks at self-interest, nobody looks at the bigger picture. And so the way that football has tried to deal with that gulf between Premier League and Championship is to say, right, parachute payments. So we're encouraging the Championship teams, when they get promoted, go and spend a bit, and we'll give you a bit of a cushion, in case you get relegated and you're not going to have massive debts, which makes sense. And I see from on one hand it works, but the problem is that it's massively distorting on the Championship, and you end up with this sort of tier of mezzanine clubs who just go up and down go up, come down, maybe spend a season or 2, go up again. And, Sheffield United, Burnley, Southampton, we all know who we're talking about. Sunderland should have been one, but managed to get relegated to 3rd place. Luton, I guess, slightly different situation given, how small their ground is, how few resources they have. But the parachute payments solve one problem, but they create another massive one. And you then end up with a big step down from sort of 5th or 6th in the Championship to the rest.
Yeah. And just on that, because, and the last point on this, that, we've seen the promotions under Dennis Smith, where we thought was an opportunity. The first promotion under Peter Reid, we thought that was an opportunity. Then when Mick McCarthy amazingly turned it around on a shoestring, we got back to the Premier League, an opportunity. And those relegations, where you just thought it was not only a wasted opportunity, but almost a waste of time in the way it all kind of panned out, and we didn't really go for it. This time, even if the worst happens, we can turn around and look to the club and almost say, there's a level of being comfortable with it, that saying, well, as a club, we couldn't have done any more if the worst happens.
Oh, I think that's true, yeah. And I also sort of think, what do you want out of football? What's the point of it as a fan? And really, you want fun. Now, that's not saying you go berserk and you blow £500 million and get done for PSR breaches and get docked hundreds of points and you go bankrupt, and next thing you know, you haven't had a consortium of Sunderland fans putting money together just to buy the ground back or whatever. You've got to be sensible about it. But fundamentally, I'd rather go up, have a proper crack at staying up, and maybe it goes wrong. And that means that actually the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years are difficult, struggling in the lower half of the Championship, because they've had to flog off half the squad. I'd rather that, but have tried, than the sort of slightly tame relegations that we have seen over that, that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's it. And are you looking to get along to any games this season?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, to be honest, I don't like covering Sunderland. I don't think I do a good job of it. I just get to, as somebody I like to think I'm pretty rational. Tempting fate. If Sunderland were ahead, I would never write the intro saying, something positive. So I think the last game I covered, I did the first leg of the playoff against Luton. Basically, a Guardian asked me late, can you go and do it? And I sort of thought, it is a way of getting to see the game. But I did the Papa John's final as a journalist, because that was, because of COVID, it was actually the only way I could get in. And I'm very grateful. I think there's about 5 Sunderland fans in the entire ground. And I thought I didn't care about that game until Linton Gooch scored. I basically had a breakdown for half an hour against Tranmere. But I'd say the League Cup final in 2014, from a reporting point of view, is one of the worst days of my life. I could not write at all. So I try and avoid writing about them. But I will be up for a handful of games. I'm going to come up for the Villa game. So I'm good friends with Tom Holland, the historian, who's a big Villa fan. So we're going to that game together. So and then I think the next one I'm definitely scheduled to come up for is the Liverpool game in February, which is a midweek game, so it's a bit easier to get to. So yeah, I will try and see him. I'll probably end up getting to 4 or 5 games, which is slightly through choice. I probably could swing it to kind of go and cover games when in the south, but I really don't like writing about them live.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I can compare that to, that reporting on them, is I could never be Sunderland on the old Championship manager back in the day, because I just hated losing with them so much that I couldn't be them. But yeah, hopefully kind of see you around at the Stadium of Light. And just one more reminder as well, that Jonathan's book, The Power and the Glory, A New History of the World Cup, is out now, and you can find it in all the usual places. So go out and order that. And that just leaves me to say, Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure as always, and hopefully we'll catch up throughout the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Good stuff. And yeah, thanks again for everyone for listening as well. We'll, of course, have all the build-up to the Palace game when football, the real football, gets going again. And I might be hammered for that with people watching England over the weekend. But yes, of course, we'll have all the build-up on the Roker Report website, or pretty much daily releases on Haway The Podcast, so look out for those. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.